So after I marked where all those mortises are going to be, I went back and darkened up the lines with a black pen because it was getting hard to see the pencil when I was cutting. So to cut these, I have a really nice spiral down cut bit. It's by Whiteside. The only problem is it's only 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to have to cut. You can see I started these one and then go back in and cut again. Now I'm cutting these a little oversized on the edges and a little bit wider than my marks so that there's a little bit of play involved for fitting every single one of these. So I don't have a ton of straight things in my shop, but a couple years ago someone gave me this piece of corian. It's a leftover cut off from a countertop, and it's very straight because it's plastic. I don't have to worry about it warping or anything. So I'm using that for my marks, and with this router, that setup is going to be to the edge of where I want my fence is 3 inches. So it's 3 inches all the way down. And then I just set the depth on my router, and I make like 2 or 3 passes, lowering this each time, and the depth is also about 1/16 of an inch deeper than I need, just so I don't have to fuss with this when putting it together. And I'm just going to start going down the line and cutting these out, and I'm going to have to move that corian because it doesn't reach the edge, and cut all these front ones, adjust my fence and cut the back ones, and then see how this fits. There's that finished first pass. So now I can move my fence back a little bit and then cut them all again. And this one should go a little faster because there's a little less material to cut. And then I'll do the same thing for the 2 on either end and then dry fit this and see how it fits. I have all my mortises cut, and I cleaned up my tenons a little bit by just filing in between each of them and rounding the corners a little bit on all of them. And now I'm going to dry fit this, and if it fits, I'm going to glue this part to the bottom half, and I'll probably use the top for clamping pressure. So that actually fits in there super nice. I'm going to take this out, put some glue on the tenons, put it back in, and then clamp this all together and let it dry overnight. So I usually try to not de-glue up super late in the day just because they can be super frustrating, but in order for me to work on this first thing tomorrow, I pretty much had to let this glue up tonight so it could dry overnight because there's so much surface area and so much glue, it's going to take a while to dry. And luckily the glue up went just about as good as my glue ups go. That's kind of the inside. I took the clamps off this first thing this morning, and my seam looks great. There's really no gaps or anything. The corners look good. That's about as good as any glue up I do can go. So now I'm going to go through and just repeat the process for the top side. It's the exact same thing, so I'm probably not going to film a ton of it. I'm going to start by marking out and cutting all my tenons, and then marking and cutting those mortises. And at some point I'm also going to trim the back of this. So that is this dry fit, and this one actually sits on there a little bit nicer dry fit than the other one. There's only a very small gap, and that's just because I kind of evened out all the differences when I glued it to the bottom piece, so now the top's pretty flat. Now the main difference between this glue up and the bottom glue up is going to be I have these left long, and I marked a straight edge from the bottom all the way to the top, and you could see how these two surfaces meet that edge at the exact same spot. I also did it down on the other side, and those meet at the same spot as well. And that's going to be super important, because if these two surfaces don't meet at the same spot, then this will not hit the wall at the same spot, and you'll have either a big gap in the bottom or the top. So this line right here is going to help me with this glue up, keeping these two on the same parallel plane. Took this out of the clamps first thing this morning. I squared up that back edge with a handsaw, and then I sanded this whole thing down to about 220. There's a couple little spots, especially in the corners, where there might be some glue issues I still need to clear up. But I'm going to put the first coat of oil on this. This is going to get teak oil, and it's getting teak oil to match existing furniture in the customer's house. And the nice thing about oil, besides the fact that it's my favorite sort of finish because it keeps the natural look of the wood, is that if I put this on there and there is some glue spots I need to clear up, I could always go back through and sand it and reapply the oil, and it's not going to make too much of a difference. If something like this is being sanded and you put if something like this is being stained and you put that first coat of stain on it, and there's some spots you missed, and you go back through, sometimes that stain just still won't take on glue spots even if you clean them up. So I have the oil and some rags, and I'm just going to wipe this down. It's probably going to take 3 or 4, potentially even more coats of that teak oil. And the nice thing about this is I don't have to worry about the back side. It's going to be up against the wall, so I could do all 3 sides at once, and then I'll move it and let it dry. Each coat has to dry for at least 24 hours, and then I'll go back through and switch from sandpaper to steel wool, clean everything up, and put a second coat on tomorrow. That is the mantle after 3 coats of oil. And I didn't film putting on all 3 coats because it's fairly redundant. But I just lightly sanded in between each coat the entire surface with number 440 steel wool, which is super fine steel wool. I didn't give it a ton of pressure. I just pretty much knocked down any of the dust that got stuck on the oil. So now to finish this up, I'm going to be waxing it. And basically you're going to put on a thin coat of wax. You don't want to put too much on. You definitely don't want to put on too little. And then you let it dry for about 15 or 20 minutes and you buff it out, and that's all this is going to take. Now you could put poly or some sort of clear coat on this after the oil dries, but the customer preferred wax. So after you put your final coat of oil on a mantle like this, you're going to want to wait 72 hours for it to fully dry. It's fully dry now before you put any sort of clear coat or wax on it. That oil needs to be completely dry, and this one's ready. I just rubbed down some of the dust because it gets pretty dusty in my shop, and I'm going to put the wax on. I have some butcher's wax I'm putting on there. You could use paste wax or Minwax. I don't really have a specific wax I prefer. I like the smell of butcher's wax a lot. And that's just because this is not really the preferred method of finishing for most people. Most people nowadays either want something painted or they want something with a super, super durable finish that they never have to fuss with. If you're putting oil and wax on a piece of furniture for a customer, I've made it clear to them that they will probably have some upkeep down the line on this, whether it's reapplying wax or reapplying oil. So that's kind of the drawback of this sort of finish, is there is some upkeep down the line to it. You could see I put a very light sheen on that. I basically kind of took a clump and smoothed it into the surface, and as that clump spread out over the surface, got another one. You're not really putting a ton of wax on this. Like, you shouldn't see big globs of buildup along the surface. If you've ever waxed a car before, it's pretty similar to that, where you're not putting a ton on there. The sun's not really high in the sky yet, so you can't really see the sheen of the wax on the camera. But if you're nervous about doing this, one thing I have read is if you take a piece of cheesecloth and put a chunk of that wax in the cheesecloth, as you rub it, the cheesecloth, the grids in the cheesecloth will naturally let out about the right amount of wax as you move across the surface. Now this is going to dry for about 15 or 20 minutes, maybe a little bit longer because it's kind of still got a morning chill out here, and then I could go through and buff that wax.